Harin Park stood in front of her bathroom mirror, fixing her dark blue suit jacket. The morning sun came through her window, making the silver in her hair shine. She was 45 years old now, and every gray hair told a story of her 15 years as a lawyer in Los Angeles. She picked up her phone and called her mother in Mexico City. "Mama, yes, I'm eating well," she said in Spanish. Her voice carried both Korean and Mexican sounds, something she was very proud of. After hanging up, she smiled at her reflection. Today would be important. She could feel it. The big building where Harin worked had her name on it, Blackwood and Associates. She was one of the top lawyers there, handling cases worth billions of dollars. Her office was on the 32nd floor, with windows that showed the whole city. She had earned this view by winning every single case she took on. That morning, Harin's friend and co-worker Do-hyun Kim was waiting by her office door. Do-hyun was younger than Harin, and he always dressed in bright colors that made the other lawyers look twice. Today he wore a purple tie that stood out against his white shirt. "You need to hear this," Do-hyun said quietly. He looked worried. "Mason and his friends are at it again." Harin knew exactly what he meant. Mason Williams, Theodore Brooks, and Richard Clark were three younger lawyers who thought they were better than everyone else. They had gone to expensive schools and came from rich families. They didn't like that Harin, who spoke with an accent, was more successful than them. Near the coffee machine, Mason and his friends were making fun of how Harin talked. They didn't know she could hear them from around the corner. "Did you hear her in court yesterday?" Mason said, trying to copy her accent badly. "Your Honor, my client is innocent. How did someone who talks like that even become a lawyer?" Theodore laughed. "Maybe she bought her law degree in Mexico. Or Korea," Richard added, and they all laughed again. Do-hyun started to walk toward them, but Harin put her hand on his arm to stop him. "Let them talk," she said calmly. "They will learn their lessons soon enough." Just then, Susan Lee, the office manager, came running up to Harin. Susan was usually very calm, but today her face was red from running. "Ms. Park, Mr. Blackwood needs you in the main conference room right now. It's about Neuratech." Harin knew about Neuratech. It was one of the biggest technology companies in the world. They made computers that could think like humans, and they were worth more money than some small countries. If they needed lawyers, it had to be serious. In the conference room, James Blackwood, the head of the law firm, was waiting with three other people. One of them was Jae-hyun Lee, the CEO of Neuratech. She was wearing a simple black dress that probably cost more than a car. Next to her sat two men in dark suits who looked very worried. "Harin, thank you for coming quickly," Mr. Blackwood said. "Neuratech has a problem. A big one." Jae-hyun Lee spoke next. Her voice was sharp and clear. "Someone is saying we stole their ideas for our new quantum computer. They're suing us for $50 billion. Harin sat down and opened her laptop. "Tell me everything," she said. For the next hour, they explained the case. Neuratech had made a new kind of computer that could solve problems faster than anything else in the world. But another company said Neuratech had stolen their secret plans. If Neuratech lost the case, they would lose everything. "Who is suing us?" Harin asked. Jae-hyun pushed a folder across the table. "A company called Quantum Tech. Their lawyer is someone named Maria Elena Rodriguez." Harin opened the folder and saw a picture of a woman with kind eyes and gray hair like her own. She read more. Maria Elena Rodriguez had gone to school in Mexico City and Stanford University. She spoke 5 languages and had won many important cases. Just then, Mason, Theodore, and Richard walked into the conference room without knocking. Mason spoke first. "Mr. Blackwood, we heard about the Neuratech case. We want to help Ms. Park. She might need support with the language." Harin watched them carefully. They were smiling, but not in a nice way. They thought this was their chance to show everyone they were better than her. Mr. Blackwood looked at Harin. "It's your case. Do you want their help? Herin smiled slowly. Yes, she said. Let them join the team. Do-hyun, who was sitting next to her, gave her a surprised look. But Herin knew exactly what she was doing. After everyone left, Do-hyun stayed behind. Why did you say yes? They'll only cause trouble. Herin stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out below her, full of tall buildings and busy streets. Do-hyun, when I first came to America, many people thought I couldn't be a good lawyer because of how I talk. They were wrong. Now Mason and his friends think the same thing about Maria Elena Rodriguez. They're wrong again. She turned to face him. Sometimes people need to learn the hard way. And I think Maria Elena Rodriguez is going to teach them a very important lesson. That afternoon, Herin sat in her office reading everything about Maria Elena Rodriguez. The more she read, the more she smiled. Mason and his friends had no idea what was coming. The next morning, they had their first meeting with Maria Elena. The big conference room was full of people. Herin's team on one side, Maria Elena's team on the other. Mason, Theodore, and Richard sat together, wearing matching blue suits like they were part of a club. Maria Elena walked in, wearing a simple red dress. When she started to speak, her voice carried the warm sounds of Mexico City. Good morning, everyone. We are here because... Mason cut her off. Excuse me, Ms. Rodriguez, he said, saying her name wrong on purpose. Could you speak more clearly? We're having trouble understanding you. Theodore and Richard laughed quietly, but Herin watched Maria Elena carefully. The older woman didn't look upset. Instead, she smiled in a way that reminded Herin of a teacher about to correct a student who had made a big mistake. Of course, Mr. Williams, Maria Elena said. She opened her briefcase and took out a thick folder. Let me be very clear. Your client, Neurotech, has stolen technology that belongs to my client. We can prove it. And when we do, it will cost your client $50 billion. The room got very quiet. Maria Elena's accent was still there, but her words were as sharp as knives. Mason's face turned red. Herin looked at Do-hyun and nodded slightly. The real battle was about to begin, and she knew something that Mason, Theodore, and Richard didn't. Sometimes the strongest fighters are the ones others underestimate. As everyone left the conference room, Herin stayed behind to look at the city again. The sun was setting, turning the windows of other buildings into squares of gold. She thought about her mother, who had taught her to be proud of who she was. She thought about all the people who had tried to make her feel small because of her accent. She picked up her phone and called her mother again. Mama, she said in Spanish, remember how you always told me that being different is not a weakness. I think it's time to show some people exactly what you meant. The next day would bring the first real battle in court. Herin went home early to prepare. She knew that Mason and his friends thought this case would be easy because they didn't respect Maria Elena. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was not knowing who Herin Park really was and what she could do. In her home office, Herin looked at the degrees on her wall. Her law degree from Harvard, her certificates for speaking 4 languages, and the award she had won. Each one had come with its own struggle, its own story of proving people wrong. Tomorrow would be another chance to show that what matters is not how you say things, but what you say. She stayed up late, reading every paper about quantum computers she could find. She needed to understand everything about the case, because Herin knew something that Mason, Theodore, and Richard were about to learn. In the law, just like in life, you should never judge someone by their accent. You should judge them by their actions. And very soon, everyone would see exactly what kind of actions Herin Park was capable of. The first day of the court case started early in the morning. Herin Park arrived at the courthouse 2 hours before anyone else. She sat in her car for a moment, looking at the big stone building where so many important decisions were made. The morning was quiet, with only a few birds singing in the trees nearby. Inside her briefcase was a special notebook. Herin had used this same notebook for 15 years, writing down everything she learned about each case. On the first page, she had written her mother's words in Spanish. "Your accent is the music of your journey." These words always gave her strength. Do Hyun Kim arrived next, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He knew Herin always needed her morning coffee before a big case. "Are you ready?" he asked, handing her one of the cups. "More ready than they know," Herin said, smiling. She took a sip of the coffee and opened her briefcase. Inside was not just her special notebook, but also something else, a secret that would change everything. But it wasn't time for that yet. Mason Williams, Theodore Brooks, and Richard Clark arrived together in Mason's expensive red sports car. They were laughing and talking loudly as they walked up the courthouse steps. They acted like today was just a game to them. "This will be the easiest case ever," Mason said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That Mexican lawyer won't know what hit her." Herin watched them walk past. They didn't even notice her standing there. She remembered something her mother used to say. The loudest people are often the ones who know the least. The courtroom was big and quiet, with dark wood walls and tall windows. Judge Sandra Thompson sat at the front, looking at everyone over her glasses. She was known for being fair but strict. Herin had been in her courtroom many times before. Maria Elena Rodriguez walked in wearing a simple gray suit. Her white hair was tied back neatly, and she carried a small laptop bag. Mason and his friends started whispering and laughing when they saw her, but they stopped quickly when Judge Thompson looked at them. "Your Honor," Maria Elena began, her accent clear, but her words strong. "Neurotech has stolen technology worth billions of dollars from my client, Quantum Tech. We will prove this today." Mason stood up quickly. "Your Honor, maybe Ms. Rodriguez could try to speak more American." It's hard to follow her accent. He smiled like he had said something clever. Judge Thompson's face got very serious. "Mr. Williams, if you interrupt opposing counsel again because of her accent, you will be removed from this courtroom. Is that clear?" Mason's face turned red. He sat down without saying anything else. Maria Elena continued as if nothing had happened. She started showing pictures on a big screen. They were complicated drawings of computer parts. "These are the plans for a quantum computer chip," she explained. "My client made these plans 3 years ago. Now look at Neurotech's new computer chip." She showed another picture. Even Herin, who knew a lot about computers, had to look twice. The 2 pictures were exactly the same. Theodore jumped up. "That doesn't prove anything. Maybe both companies just had the same idea." Maria Elena smiled quietly. She pressed a button on her laptop, and a new picture appeared. It showed emails between Neurotech workers talking about the stolen plans. The room got very quiet. Jae-Yeon Lee, Neurotech's CEO, looked worried for the first time. She wrote something on a piece of paper and passed it to Herin. Herin read the note. "How bad is this?" She wrote back, "Let me handle it. Trust me." It was Herin's turn to speak. She stood up slowly, carrying only her special notebook. "Your Honor, these emails look very bad for my client. But looks can be tricky. Sometimes things that seem simple are actually very complicated." Mason, Theodore, and Richard looked confused. They had expected Herin to argue strongly against the emails. Instead, she seemed calm, almost happy. "Ms. Rodriguez has shown us some interesting pictures," Herin continued. "But I would like to ask her a few questions about quantum computers. After all, this whole case is about understanding this very complicated technology." Maria Elena nodded, ready for questions. Mason and his friends smiled again, thinking Herin was about to trick Maria Elena with hard technical questions. "Ms. Rodriguez," Herin said politely, "could you tell us about your background in quantum computing?" Before Maria Elena could answer, Mason interrupted again. "Your Honor, what does her background matter? We're here about stolen technology." Judge Thompson looked angry. "Mr. Williams, This is your last warning." Herin waited for everyone to be quiet. Then she opened her special notebook and took out a piece of paper. "Your Honor, I have here a very interesting document. It's a patent for quantum computing technology. The inventor's name is Maria Elena Rodriguez." The room exploded with whispers. Mason's mouth fell open. Theodore dropped his pen. Richard started flipping through his papers quickly, looking confused. Not only did Ms. Rodriguez invent this technology, Herin continued, but she did it 15 years ago, while working at CERN, the world's biggest science laboratory. She has written 3 books about quantum computing, in 5 different languages. Jae-Yun Lee was sitting up very straight now, her eyes wide. Do-hyun was trying not to smile too much. Mason and his friends looked like they had just seen a ghost. Maria Elena sat quietly, her hands folded on the table. She looked at Mason, Theodore, and Richard with the same kind smile she had worn all morning. "Your Honor," Herin said, "I would like to take a short break. I think my client needs to have an important conversation with Ms. Rodriguez, not as enemies in court, but as people who both care about making computers better." Judge Thompson nodded. "We'll take a 1-hour break." As everyone started leaving the courtroom, Herin heard Mason talking to Theodore and Richard. "How were we supposed to know she was some kind of genius?" he whispered. Herin walked past them. "Maybe," she said quietly, "you should learn to listen to people instead of just hearing their accents." In the courthouse hallway, Do-hyun caught up with Herin. "You knew about Maria Elena's background all along, didn't you? That's why you let Mason and his friends join the case." Herin nodded. "Sometimes the best lesson is watching your own mistakes come back to teach you." She looked out the courthouse window at the city below. The morning sun made all the buildings shine like gold. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. "How is the case going, Maija?" Herin typed back. "It's going perfectly, Mama. Some people are learning that you were right all along. An accent is just the music of a journey, and some journeys lead to amazing places. The next hour would bring big changes for everyone." But for now, Herin just stood quietly, watching Mason, Theodore, and Richard sitting on a bench, looking worried and small. They were finally learning what she had known all along. True strength comes in many accents, and wisdom speaks in all languages. During the court break, everyone gathered in a large meeting room at the courthouse. The room had a long table made of dark wood, and through its windows, you could see the city stretching out below. Herin Park sat at one end of the table, while Maria Elena Rodriguez sat at the other. Between them sat Jae-Yun Lee, the CEO of Neurotech, looking worried but determined. Mason, Theodore, and Richard stood in a corner, trying to look small. They had stopped laughing and joking. Now they just watched quietly as the 3 women began to talk. "Ms. Rodriguez," Jae-Yun said, her voice steady but respectful, "I had no idea you were the original inventor of this technology. If I had known." Maria Elena held up her hand gently. "Please, call me Maria Elena. And yes, I created this technology many years ago. But that is not why I am here today." Herin watched carefully. She knew what was coming next. Do-hyun, sitting beside her, leaned forward to listen. "I am here," Maria Elena continued, "because 6 months ago, I sent my complete research files to Neurotech. I wanted to work together. I wanted to make something better than either of us could make alone." Jae-Yun's eyes got wide. "What? I never saw any research files from you." Maria Elena opened her laptop and turned it around. On the screen was an email sent to Neurotech's main office. With the email were hundreds of files about quantum computers. "Someone at your company took my files," Maria Elena explained. "They used my ideas. But they never told you where these ideas came from. They never showed you my offer to work together." The room was completely quiet. Even the sound of traffic outside seemed far away. Jae-Yun Lee's face showed first surprise, then understanding, and finally anger. Parker Jones, Jia said quietly. He was in charge of reading new research proposals. He left the company 3 months ago, right after our new computer design was finished. Herin stood up slowly. Your Honor, she said to Judge Thompson, who was watching from near the door. I think we need to make a phone call. Judge Thompson nodded. Herin took out her phone and dialed a number she had ready. She put the phone on speaker and placed it in the middle of the table. A man's voice answered. Hello. Mr. Parker Jones, Herin said clearly. This is Herin Park from Blackwood and Associates. I'm here with Jia Lee from Neurotech, Maria Elena Rodriguez, and Judge Thompson. We're calling about some quantum computing research files. There was a long silence. Then they heard the sound of papers being moved quickly. I don't know what you're talking about, Parker Jones said, but his voice was shaking. Really? Herin said. That's interesting, because we have proof that you received Ms. Rodriguez's research files. We have proof that you never showed them to Ms. Lee. And we have proof that you sold company secrets to 3 other technology companies before you left Neurotech. Another long silence. Then Parker Jones started talking very fast. It wasn't my fault. Those other companies offered me so much money. And that Mexican lady's research was just sitting there. Nobody would know if I used it. Thank you, Mr. Jones, Herin said calmly. You just confessed to corporate theft in front of a judge. The FBI agents listening to this call will be at your house in about 5 minutes. They heard a crash on the other end of the phone, then running footsteps, then nothing. He ran, Du Hyun said, shaking his head. They always run. Jia Lee stood up and walked to Maria Elena's end of the table. She bowed deeply, showing great respect. I am so sorry, she said. I had no idea one of my employees had done this. Please, let me make it right. Maria Elena smiled. That is why I came here myself. I knew something was wrong, but I also knew that sometimes good people are tricked by bad people. The question is, what do we do now? Herin looked at Mason, Theodore, and Richard, who were still standing in their corner. Would you like to offer any thoughts? She asked them. Any clever comments about accents or backgrounds? They shook their heads quickly, looking at the floor. Good, Herin said, because I have a suggestion. Everyone turned to look at her. Herin opened her special notebook and took out some papers she had prepared the night before. These are partnership agreements, she explained. Neurotech and Quantum Tech can work together. Maria Elena's brilliant research combined with Neurotech's resources could change the world. Instead of fighting in court, we could be making history. Jia Lee read the papers carefully. This is very fair, she said, sounding surprised. We would be equal partners. Of course it's fair, Maria Elena said with a warm smile. Herin Park wrote it. She understands what it means to be underestimated, to be judged by how you speak instead of what you know. She made sure everyone would be treated with respect. Judge Thompson stepped forward. If you all agree to this partnership, we can end the court case right now. Mr. Jones will still face criminal charges, but that will be a different case. Jia Lee looked at Maria Elena. Would you consider becoming our chief science officer, with full control over research and development? Maria Elena pretended to think about it, but her eyes were twinkling. Only if I can bring in some new lawyers to handle the patents and contracts. Perhaps. She looked at Herin. Someone who understands that wisdom can speak with any accent. Herin felt warmth spread through her chest. This was more than winning a case. This was about changing how people thought, how they judged others. I would be honored, Herin said. But first, she turned to Mason, Theodore, and Richard. I think you 3 need to say something to Ms. Rodriguez. The 3 men stepped forward, looking ashamed. Mason spoke first, his voice quiet. We're very sorry, Ms. Rodriguez. We were wrong about you. We were wrong about everything. Maria Elena stood up. Even though she was shorter than them, somehow she seemed taller. Your apology is accepted. But remember this feeling. Remember what happened when you judged someone by their accent instead of their actions. And remember that the next brilliant mind you meet might not speak the way you do. Judge Thompson smiled. I think we're done here. Miss Park, would you like to handle the paperwork for the new partnership? Herin nodded. She took out her phone to call her mother, but Maria Elena stopped her. Wait, Maria Elena said. First, let's take a picture. My granddaughter won't believe this story unless she sees it. They all gathered together. Herin, Maria Elena, Jae-yun, Do-hyun, and Judge Thompson. In the background, Mason, Theodore, and Richard stood awkwardly, looking like they had learned a lesson they would never forget. Herin thought about all the times people had made fun of her accent, all the times they had assumed she couldn't be a good lawyer because of how she spoke. Now here she was, helping create a partnership worth billions of dollars, standing next to another brilliant woman who had faced the same prejudices. After the picture, Herin finally called her mother. Mama, she said in Spanish, remember how you told me my accent was the music of my journey? Today, that music helped create something amazing. Outside the courthouse, the sun was setting. Herin and Maria Elena walked together to their cars, talking about their plans for the new partnership. Behind them, Mason, Theodore, and Richard walked quietly, carrying heavy boxes of legal papers, their first assignment as junior members of the new legal team. You know, Maria Elena said to Herin, sometimes the best victory is not just winning the case, but changing minds. Herin looked back at the three men struggling with their boxes. I think some minds have definitely been changed today. They both laughed, their accents blending together in the evening air, creating a new kind of music, the sound of victory, of respect earned, and of lessons learned that would never be forgotten. 3 months had passed since the courthouse meeting. The morning sun shone through the windows of Neurotech's new legal department, where Herin Park now had an office next to Maria Elena Rodriguez. The view showed the same city as before, but everything else had changed. Herin sat at her desk, looking at a newspaper article on her computer. The headline read, Neurotech and Quantum Tech Partnership creates revolutionary new computer. Below the headline was a picture of Herin, Maria Elena, and Jae-yun Lee standing together, smiling at the camera. Do-hyun knocked on her office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee, their morning tradition that hadn't changed. Have you seen the new training room? He asked, putting her coffee on her desk. Not yet, Herin said. Is it ready? Come and see, Do-hyun said with a big smile. They walked down the hallway to a large room with glass walls. Inside, Mason, Theodore, and Richard were sitting at desks, looking very different from 3 months ago. Their expensive suits were gone, replaced by simple business clothes. They were taking notes as Maria Elena stood at the front of the room, teaching them about quantum computing patents. Today, Maria Elena was saying, we will learn about international patent law. And yes, I will teach some of it in Spanish, some in Korean, and some in English, because in our new company, we believe that knowledge has no single language. Herin watched through the glass as Mason raised his hand, not to make a joke, but to ask a real question. His face showed real interest and respect. Theodore was typing everything Maria Elena said into his computer. Richard had 3 different translation books on his desk. They're learning, Do-hyun said quietly. They're changing, Herin corrected him. That's more important. In another part of the building, Jae-yun Lee was holding a meeting with scientists from both companies. The walls of her office were covered with pictures of quantum computers and awards. But the biggest picture showed Maria Elena receiving her first patent 30 years ago. Herin's phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother. Coming to visit next week. Should I bring your old science books? Herin smiled as she typed back. Yes, please. We're starting a new program here. We're going to teach young lawyers and scientists that success can sound like any accent, look like any face, come from any place. The phone buzzed again quickly. Just like I always told you. Harin put her phone away and walked to the training room door. Maria Elena saw her and smiled. Harin. Perfect timing. I was just about to tell these young lawyers about our new mentorship program. Mason, Theodore, and Richard turned to look at Harin. Their faces showed something new: respect, a little shame, and hope to do better. The mentorship program, Maria Elena continued, will help people who might not fit what others think a lawyer or scientist should be like. People with different accents, from different countries, with different ways of thinking. Because innovation doesn't care what you sound like, it cares what you can do. Harin stepped into the room. And our first group of students arrives next week. 20 young people from 10 different countries. They all have dreams of becoming lawyers or scientists. They all have their own accents, their own stories. And who will be teaching them? Do-hyun asked, even though he already knew the answer. All of us, Harin said. She looked at Mason, Theodore, and Richard. Even those of us who had to learn some hard lessons about judging others. Mason stood up slowly. Ms. Park, Ms. Rodriguez, I know we can never fully make up for how we acted before, but we want to help these students. We want to make sure nobody else makes the same mistakes we did. Maria Elena walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. That's exactly why you three are still here. The best teachers are often people who learn their lessons the hard way. Just then, Jae-yeon Lee came into the room. The news gets better, she said excitedly. The quantum computer partnership is working so well that 5 other technology companies want to join us. They're sending representatives next month. From where? Harin asked, although she could guess what was coming. India, Nigeria, Brazil, Egypt, and Vietnam, Jae-yeon said with a big smile. None of them speak English as their first language. They all have different accents. Harin looked at Mason, Theodore, and Richard. Would you like to help welcome them? The 3 men nodded quickly. Theodore spoke up. We've been practicing our cultural awareness. And we've been taking language classes too. Richard pulled out his phone and said carefully in Spanish, Bienvenidos a nuestra empresa. His accent wasn't perfect, but his effort was sincere. Maria Elena clapped her hands together. Very good. And Harin, didn't you tell me your mother is coming to visit? Yes, Harin said. She wants to help with the mentorship program. She says she has 30 years of experience teaching people to be proud of their accents. Perfect. Jae-yeon said. We'll have her speak at the opening ceremony. After all, she raised a daughter who helped change how an entire company thinks about diversity. Harin felt tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears. She looked around the room at all these people who had been through so much together. Mason, Theodore, and Richard were talking with Maria Elena about the mentorship program, their faces eager to help. Do-hyun was showing Jae-yeon the applications from young people who wanted to join their company. Later that day, Harin stood in her office again, looking out at the city. The sun was setting, making the buildings glow like gold. On her desk was her special notebook, still open to her mother's words. Your accent is the music of your journey. She picked up her phone and took a picture of the sunset. She sent it to her mother with a message. The journey isn't over, Mama. It's just beginning. And now we're helping others start their own journeys. In the training room, she could hear Maria Elena teaching, her warm accent floating down the hallway. In another room, Mason was practicing Spanish with Theodore and Richard. From Jae-yeon's office came the sound of a video call with scientists from around the world, all speaking English with their own unique accents. Harin smiled. This was the future she had always dreamed of, a place where everyone's voice could be heard, where every accent told a story, and where wisdom spoke in all the languages of the world. The next morning, when the sun rose over the city, it would shine on a different kind of law firm, a different kind of technology company. It would shine on people who had learned that the best ideas, the strongest leadership, and the greatest wisdom can come with any accent, from any place, in any voice. And somewhere in Mexico City, Horin's mother was packing her bags, getting ready to help teach a new generation of lawyers and scientists that their accents were not barriers to success. They were proof of their journey, evidence of their courage, and music that made the world a richer, better place.